Hi. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here, and it's great to be always the last speaker. You know why? Because there's nobody after me, which means we can go for another couple hours. And I know you're all excited about that. Because what's a better topic to talk about than tourism and how it works for peace? So just to tell you a little bit of background, I grew up in Jerusalem. I work a lot, not only in tourism, I've worked for the last, I'm getting older, so every time I have to calculate how long ago. I worked for the last almost 18 years in peace building and conflict resolution, and I've worked in places from Afghanistan to Syria to America to Ireland and Northern Ireland to Jerusalem to Israel and Palestine. And so I've been going around, worked in many nonprofit organizations, but one of the things that always kept daunting me as I did that is how sustainable is my work? How many people am I really reaching when I'm doing my peace work? Before I answer that question, I want to go a little bit back. I want to tell you a little bit about myself and how I grew up. I grew up in Jerusalem. This is me when I was a little kid. I'm the young one. That's my older brother. This is me when I used to be good looking. As my neighbors, when they see me still, they keep saying, "Oh, what happened to you?" It's all right. But I was 7 years old when the Palestinian Intifada uprising started. And as a 7-year-old kid, we didn't have much in Jerusalem. We didn't have any public parks in my area. We didn't have any community centers, any playgrounds. And so we were really bored. And when kids are bored, they do crazy things. So we watched on TV the uprising, the Palestinian uprising. I'm Palestinian. We thought, the whole throwing rocks thing sounds really cool. So we get to the closest road, and we start throwing some rocks. What we didn't know is that we were supposed to throw rocks at Israeli cars, being a Palestinian. So we ended up throwing rocks at our neighbors, who did not find it cute that kids did that. Well, that was my first introduction of the conflict. I did that for a while, figured out where I'm supposed to throw stones, and then did it. When I was 9 years old, a group of Israeli soldiers came into our home and arrested Taysir, my older brother. I'm the youngest of 7. Taysir is the one just older than me. He's 9 years old. The reason he's so much older than me is I'm what you call the oops child. Just showed up unplanned for. And it meant we also were the closest. Well, a group of soldiers came into our home, arrested Taysir on suspicion of throwing rocks. He refused to confess, and he was forced into confession by being beaten up to do it, which resulted in a lot of internal injuries. He had a spleen failure, had a liver failure. He spent just a little under a year in prison. And when he was released, he was very ill and took him to a hospital where he passed away a few days after a surgery in that hospital. I was 10 years old when that happened. And I want you to imagine being in that kind of situation. How would you feel, and what would you do? I was angry, I was bitter, and all I could think about is a revenge. I felt that if you are a good brother, you must revenge. That's how it works. Well, that's what I did. It almost felt like if I come down now, and I walk to one of you, if I walk to you here, and I just punch you in the face. I'm not going to do that, don't worry. But if I just come down and punch you in the face, what's the first thing you're going to think about? Weird, okay. I'm going to try somebody who's going to react. What would you do? Yeah, you're going to punch me back in my face. That's an honest response. If somebody hurts you, what's the first thing you're going to do? You normally want to hurt back. How many of you, if somebody punches you in the face, this is what you think about? I'm going to take a step backward and think about this really logically. How many of you do that? If you're honest, most of us don't. Unless your name is Jesus Christ, really, that's not how we behave. And that's how I grew up. That's what I did for the next 8 years. I was very active in politics and writing and mobilizing. I was very active out of anger. I thought always I was active out of justice, but that wasn't true. I was active out of anger, out of bitterness, out of wanting that need of revenge. And I did that until I was 18. When I was 18, I went to study Hebrew. And the reason I went to study Hebrew is I didn't study it in high school because I considered it the language of the enemy. And suddenly, I realized after I finished high school, oops, I need Hebrew to go to college. I need Hebrew to work. I need Hebrew for everything. So I started looking for a place to learn Hebrew, and the best place is a place called Ulpan. If you're a Jewish person who lives outside Israel and you want to move to Israel, that's where you go to study Hebrew, which meant I was the only Palestinian in that classroom. I was 18 years old, and that was my first interaction with an Israeli or a Jewish person who was not a soldier, which some of them were nice, but you can't really have a normal conversation with somebody carrying a gun. For some reason, that dialogue meeting just doesn't work out. And suddenly I'm sitting in a classroom where everybody was the other, and I had the first interaction, the first meeting. And it was extremely hard in the beginning to do that. But as we got to know each other, and we didn't have enough language skills, so in the beginning our talking was more about what kind of coffee you drink, and Israelis drink a horrible coffee called instant coffee, Nescafe. Sorry, Nescafe, but no promotion for you here. While Arabs, we drink something really good called Arabic coffee. It's thick, it's strong, and it will definitely wake you up when you need it to. And then we'll argue over music, because I'm the only Palestinian I know in the world that is the biggest fan of something called American country music, which nobody understands what I'm talking about or why I do this. And it was nice, we would argue about that, and some of them like country music, and so we'll talk about singers like Johnny Cash and so on. But it was these kind of conversations, and eventually we talked about politics, and we talked about Israel and Palestine, we talked about life, and we talked about girls, and we talked about all these things that you normally would talk about. And that experience, it's what changed my life. Because I realized it is not what happens to you that defines who you are, but rather what you do with it and how you respond. Well, you might wonder, what does all of this have to do with tourism? I thought we were talking here about tourism and peace. It does a lot, because this is an experience that set me up to work on the tourism projects I worked on later. I started working in media projects. I've worked with National Geographic on a few media projects and a few photography projects and a few stories. But one thing that kept getting in my mind is, how do I make my work in peace more sustainable? What is it that I can do? And we came up with an idea, me and this guy who's Jewish, American. We were born actually only 10 days apart. And we've become best friends for the last 8 years. We came up with this idea: what if we take the concept of peace, and instead of starting another NGO and another meeting, what if we insert it into an already existing structure, a business structure? Because if we're able to reform business structures to include peace in it, it will reach way more people than all the nonprofit meetings we were doing. And so we decided to go for tourism, because that's what I studied. And the concept we started in Jerusalem, our first destination was in Jerusalem, was something we called the dual narrative concept. What does the dual narrative concept is? Well, most tours that go to Israel, to Palestine, to the Holy Land, everyone calls it something different, normally have one tour guide. You go on a pilgrimage, you go through the whole country, you see all the holy sites, and you see where Jesus did this and did that. And then you leave having only heard one person during your whole trip. And we thought there's something wrong with that concept, because Israel and Palestine, the Holy Land, regardless what you want to call it, is much more than that. And we believe that people were interested in much more than that. So we said, what if we have 2 tour guides instead of 1? What if we bring an Israeli and a Palestinian and have them co-lead trips together? And everyone we knew said that was stupid, because Are they going to agree to work together? Will people really be interested in this? Well, this is Hussam and Yuval. They've been working with us for 5, 6 years since we started. And imagine this, a group going with them, traveling across the country, hearing more than one story. You have an Israeli telling things from an Israeli perspective, a Palestinian telling it from Palestinian perspective, and then each having a dialogue, not fighting, not arguing, not curling. They might have different perspectives, but they are bringing their own stories. They talk about the different narratives in their own community, and it creates something totally different. Because when I'm a tour guide, and I'm preaching at you, well, this is the Aqsa Mosque, and this is what you need to know about it, you don't even ask me that many questions. But if I'm having a conversation with another guide, then you are also part of that conversation. So I say something, he says something, she says something, then the group starts getting a lot more involved. But even that we didn't think was good enough, because that's only a couple perspectives. We thought we need to give access to people. So groups that come with us would do anything from meeting religious leaders, a rabbi, an imam, a pastor, a priest, would have meetings with artists, listen to Israeli music and Arabic music, sometimes the two playing music together, going to have Shabbat dinner at Jewish family home, and then going to have a dinner at a Palestinian family home. And then after that, maybe meeting with archaeologists and talk about archaeology and how it's being sometimes politicized or not, and meeting with local communities, and then even going to meet settlers, Israeli settlers, and then meeting Palestinian refugees, and then meeting maybe people from the army, and then meeting people who are journalists. And depending on the group, we started tailoring these different trips that tries to show the place. Not in a way to convince you to be more pro-Palestinian or to be more pro-Israeli, but more in a way to convince you, to show you, here's a reality, and here's some of the people who are making something about it. Here's some of the peace groups. We still did all the holy sites, and we still did the beach stuff, and we still did the Dead Sea, but we wanted to give more of authentic experience, and the change was incredible. Having, for example, a Jewish family going to a Palestinian home, in a refugee camp and spending 2 nights in homestay there, something that has never been done before. And then going to pick them up 2 days later was just amazing. So why did we do that? We wanted to create a company that can connect the world, promote intercultural understanding, and be socially and environmentally responsible. But not only that, we started looking at the market. We said, is there really a market for this? And it was amazing. Because there is a market. 66% of consumers around the world say they prefer to buy products and services from companies that have implemented programs to give back to society. Well, we were working with the society. Every speaker, every peace organization, everyone we met, we paid them to do that. We didn't ask favors from anyone. We believed being socially responsible is helping the community. We start helping locals to learn in the tour guides program. We start engaging with the community. So our program was not us coming and saying, here's what we want, but rather, here's how we can do it together. How can we help you? How can we do something that you want to do? 46% are willing to pay extra. That's good news. Because when you have 2 tour guides, the cost on you is much higher. And when you have more speakers and you're going to pay them, the cost is much higher. And when you do homestays and you pay them like you're paying a hotel, the cost is much higher. So half of the people who go on trips are actually willing to do that. And finally, they are the ones who are willing to do repeat trips. They are the ones who traveled with us to Jerusalem. This is how we ended up expanding, are the ones who are willing to come back. And they started telling us, well, we liked what you did in Jerusalem. Can you do something similar in Northern Ireland? You know, the whole Catholic and Protestant thing. Can we do 2 tour guides there? And so we said, well, I've worked in Northern Ireland. Why not? We went there and started a program there. And then another group comes to us and says, how about Egypt? You know, there's all these talks in Egypt about Christians versus Muslims, and you know how Christians are persecuted, and we don't know if it's true or not, and we go there, and so many of us just interested. I said, well, if you go to Egypt, maybe for 1 or 2 of the days you are there, we can make sure that you have 2 tour guides, 1 Christian and 1 Muslim. And we can go and visit some of the churches. And we can go and visit some of the Muslim groups and some of the even more religious Salafi groups. And we took a group from Washington, D.C. that was a conservative Christian church, and going into meeting Salafi leaders who are having lunch with them in their home, and meeting a woman who is fully covered with only her, with a niqab, with a burqa, and then having a discussion with her where they've never had that chance before of asking her, why do you wear this? Is this religion or culture? And having to engage in direct conversation, not what the guide telling them, because I can tell you much about that, but all from a perception. I've never put a burqa on, doesn't look really that good on me. But having somebody else who's actually lived it, going to places like Turkey and dealing with things there, not only the Turkish issues, which there are multiple narratives there, but also starting to think about the Syrian refugees, where I worked for many years, and think, how can our trips support some of the Syrian refugees there? What can we do to not ignore that there are 2 million Syrian refugees in that country, and if we're coming to here, we shouldn't ignore it. If you're German, you might want to think about that also now within your own country here in Germany. But really, what we've been thinking about is how can tourism change the world? There are 7 billion people in the world today. 1+ billion people travel internationally every year. I want you to imagine with me, if those 1.2, I believe now, billion people change the way they travel, where it's not only about being in your air-conditioned, nice bus, taking pictures in your great zoom camera where it can get somebody at the end of this room without them knowing you even taking pictures of them. But rather it's about stepping outside your comfort zone and getting to meet people one-on-one, getting to hear their stories, getting to understand where they come from. What would that do? How would we care, how much more would we care about other cultures and other people? How much would be connected to them when we hear about problems happening to them? If the 100 million people who traveled to Egypt before the revolution 2011 have really, for the 10 years before, have really engaged with the locals, would they have done something about it? If the people who traveled to Syria before have really engaged with locals, would they have done nothing as they heard about the conflict going on? Travel can make a lot of difference if it's authentic, if we meet people. When I was a little kid, I remember when I was a little kid, tourists would come by and take pictures of me because, as you saw, I looked photogenic back then. And I loved it. This is partially why I probably ended up doing tourism. And I would go and try to talk to them. And so many of them had the time to stop and take the picture, but not the time to spend a minute talking to the kid they took a picture of. This is not the right way to travel. And this is the kind of thing we need to do. We need to reshape the story, to reshape the narrative, to reshape the way we travel, to connect with the locals that they care about us. This is my mother, by the way, and I get her to host sometimes people. And this is one of the best dishes in the world. It's called maqloube, or upside down. And if you come to Jerusalem, I'll take you. Talk to me later. And it's amazing because you get to have a different conversation when you eat with people. And then we would dance together and do some belly dancing, which I would be happy to perform, but you probably don't want that. You know, there is a market for this. This is one of our trips we do, is for National Geographic. And we operate all National Geographic trips now in Israel and Palestine. We bring probably about 200 people a year. We operating trips in Oman and Dubai, which is focused on culture and archaeology, and we bring in maybe about 80 to 100 people a year, something like that. And there is a market for this. People are hungry for this. If we start to change, the customers will follow. The people will follow, and they are willing to pay for it. But what's most important is that we do give an authentic experience. I want to read to you a poem, and then maybe, where did I put my phone? since I don't want to mess up the poem, so I have to read it. It's by an Israeli poet. See, I'm bridging the gap here. A Palestinian reading an Israeli poet poem. He says, once I sat on the steps by a gate at David's tower. I placed my 2 heavy baskets at my side. A group of tourists was standing around their guide, and I became their target marker. You see the man with the basket? Just right of his head, there's an arch from the Roman period. Just right of his head. But he's moving. I say to myself, redemption will come only if their guide tells them, you see that arch from the Roman period? It's not important. But next to it, left and down a bit, there sits a man who's brought fruits and vegetables for his family. It's really about what our priority is. This is Yehuda Amichai. What's more important? I love archaeology. I'm even wearing a ring with a couple thousand years old coin because it means a lot to me. But that's not the most important. It is people, it is experience, it is connections. And if we do that, it will make a difference. Ibn Battuta, an Arab traveler, said, when you travel, you become speechless. But then it turns you into a storyteller. And nothing changes the world more than telling stories. I don't know if we have enough time, but I would like, do we have 5 minutes? 2 minutes. Oh, wow. Well, I guess no questions. But let me tell you then a story. It's also a story by an Israeli writer. His name is Amos Oz. He said, if you're walking by a building that's caught on fire, what do? You have 3 options. First option, you run away. You get as far as possible. And even if there are people in that building, you don't want to get in because you get caught. You know, when people travel, they don't want to get to hear sometimes about all the problems and all the issues and meet people because you might start caring and you might get involved and then you might get hurt. That's what many people do. The second option is to create a committee to figure out who to blame for starting the fire. And that's also quite common. Let's figure out who do we hate because of this trip. Many trips in Israel and Palestine are like that. Just tell me, who do I dislike and who do I like here? That's who's right and who's wrong. The world is a lot more complicated than that. Even when we talk about justice and when we talk about the right things, it needs to come not out of who do I hate, but rather how do I help. The third option is exactly that. How do I help? Well, he said, you bring a bucket, you fill it with water, and you throw it in the fire. But then not everybody has a bucket. Well, then you bring a spoon, you fill it, I just killed it. You bring a cup. Oh, I'm going to make something up for it. You bring a cup, you fill it with water, and you throw it in the fire. Well, what if you don't have a cup? Where is it? You bring a spoon. You fill it with water, and you throw it in the fire. Some really innovative people have told me it's better if you spit on the fire. Or few naughty people said you can also pee on the fire. So that's also interesting. But here's the idea. We often think, what can I do to make a difference? What can I do to change the world? The truth is, many of us get depressed when we ask that question because we want to change the whole world as soon as we can. And we get frustrated and we can't. But what we need to maybe connect with is what can I do on whichever level to make a small change. Don't think of just the whole world. Think of yourself. Think of your own company. Think of the people around you. Think of your own neighbors. Think of your own family. If we think of our spoon, eventually we'll be able to get to the cup and eventually maybe to the bucket. But if we keep thinking, well, what can I do? I'm no one. You will not be able to do much. So I want to inspire you today, if anything, to think about just your spoon. If you want to talk to me later, in 41221, I'll be here for the next couple days. And thank you so much for your time.